We are on the bank of the Irtysh River in the Ashutas Paleobotanical Reserve. Here from atop a steep hill one can admire extremely picturesque yields of colored clays. Every year the beauty of this place draws hundreds of tourists willing to go viral in the Instagram with a couple of unimaginable photos. Yet for paleontologists it's not a tourist site but rather a workplace, a lab that sparked multiple discoveries. The river cut through the valley, stripping the Oligocene deposits. It's a true museum of the most ancient history. Digging in the clays of Ashutas good and proper, one can find not only the hardened leaves of magnolias and oleanders, but also the bones of prehistoric mammals. "30 million years ago, it was a rough place to be. Our excursion round Ashutas back in the Oligocene would come to an end pretty quickly, as we most likely would fall victims of a hyenodon or a predatory bull, weighing about a ton. "35 million years ago, approximately in these latitudes, the first deer, the primitive humerix, appeared. Back then they had no antlers yet and resembled more the long-legged nutrias. These animals inhabited the interfluvial sublime plains with understocking dry woods and forest steppes. In the course of several million years, they occupied the territory from the Aral Sea to Manchuria. The ancestors of what we now know as deer adapted to specific environmental niches evolved and formed various subspecies, which over time turned into separate species. By the end of the Miocene, or about 8 million years ago, the first representative of the real deer, the Cervavitus, came around. It was about 75 centimeters in withers and already had branchy antlers. In the late Pliocene, or about 3 million years ago, dozens of deer species, many of which became extinct by our time, were roaming Asia, Europe, America and the north of Africa. At present, 51 cervidae or antlered ruminants inhabit the planet. There are deer the size of a rabbit, others may weigh up to half a ton. The Megalosaurus, also known as the Irish elk, was the largest ever deer that lived on the Earth. It disappeared rather recently, only 9,000 years ago. The huge Megalosaurus's antlers were presented by Peter the Great to the Saxon Elector Friedrich Augustus II and are now displayed in Moritzburg Castle. They were found at a coastal cliff along the Irtysh. They spread to over 3.5 meters and weigh about 150 kilograms. Paleontologists consider global climate change in the end of the last ice age, when the average annual temperature increased by 5 to 7 degrees Celsius and the global sea level rose by 120 meters, the main reason of the Megalosaurus's extinction on the territory of modern-day Kazakhstan. Yet there is also an alternative hypothesis. Golden deer figurines were found in a number of Saka barrows. The ancient artists depicted deer with enormous antlers with numerous outgrowths and long tails. They look very similar to the Megalosaurus, and this hypothesis can also be legitimate, as previously, for example, they thought that mammoths died about 10,000 years ago, and yet the radiocarbon analysis of the remains from the Wrangel Island proved that the woolly elephants still existed about 4,000 years ago. The Megalosaurus is considered the most probable ancestor of all modern red deer species. The genus of red deer of the Cervidae family includes 10 species, out of which 2 live in Kazakhstan, namely the red deer or marals and the Bukhara deer or the hunguls. The red deer species includes 7 subspecies: the European deer, the Caucasian deer, the wapiti, the maral, the Crimean deer, and the Manchurian deer. Until very recently, the Tugai or the Bukhara deer was considered a subspecies of the red deer, but was designated as a separate species based on the latest genetic studies. Whereas the Marals mainly live in the mountains, the Hunguls have well adapted to the inundated forests of the Central Asian rivers called the Tugai Woods. The Marals and the Hunguls are close relatives and can even form hybrids in open-air cage captivity. Yet, in the wild, the interbreeding is impossible due to differences in behavior, the terms of mating seasons, and the specific social structure of populations. The Bukhara deer or the Hungul is endemic for Central Asia. In Kazakhstan, it mainly lived in the lower streams of the Sirdarya River and in the floodplain of the Ili River. An authentic recording of encountering a Hungul in southern Balkhash area dates back to 1902. In the Sirdarya basin, the last representative of the species was killed in 1956. In the 60s of the last century, the Hungul population passed through a bottleneck. There were slightly over 100 animals left in the Tigrovaya Balka Nature Reserve in Tajikistan and Zarafshan district in Uzbekistan. The changing habitat, the cutting of riparian forests, the competition for food with livestock as well as excessive hunting left no chances of survival for the rare species. It was already impossible to save the Hunguls without these special efforts on behalf of humans. In 1982, 20 Hungul deer were brought to Karachingil Hunting Nature Reserve in Almaty region from Tajikistan. 3 adult males, 13 females and 6 fingerlings. Their acclimatization was successful and the deer really liked the Tugai and reed biotopes at the mouth of the Tugan River on the shore of the Kapchagai Reservoir. Today the Hungul population in Karachingil amounts to about 700 animals. On June 9, 1992 in Rio de Janeiro, Kazakhstan, and 145 more countries signed the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. Under the convention, Kazakhstan undertook the international responsibility for maintaining and restoring viable animal and plant populations in their natural habitats. This symbolical step laid the foundation for the international cooperation in the sphere of conservation. In 1995, the Bukhara Deer Conservation Program in Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan and Turkmenistan, sponsored by the Worldwide Fund for Nature or WWF, was launched. In 2000, as per the decision of the Ministry of Agriculture of Kazakhstan and with the WWF assistance, 9 Hungul deer were relocated from Karachingil to the special open-air cage on the bank of the Sirdarya River. In 2001, the state public institution, the Sirdarya Turkestan State Regional Nature Park, was established to protect the deer and their habitats. Today, an inter-department expert group of the Forestry and Fauna Committee under the Ministry of Agriculture of Kazakhstan is heading to the Sirdarya Turkestan State Regional Nature Park. Their task is to relocate the Bukhara deer to the newly created Ile Balkhash Wildlife Reserve. Not an easy mission, frankly speaking, as the Sirdarya and the southern Balkhash area are located almost 1,500 kilometers away from each other. Doing a successful job requires the joint efforts of several designated and authorized agencies. Transportation boxes were provided by the Association for the Conservation of Biodiversity of Kazakhstan. The logistics are ensured by the Animal Resettlement Center of the Okodzoprom Public Enterprise. An experienced animal immobilization specialist from the Far East zoologist is also in the team. The Zoology Institute of Kazakhstan is responsible for the operation's scientific supervision. The Worldwide Fund for Nature is helping with money. The staff of the national park meet the task force at the Kizil Sharua cordon. According to the law of Kazakh hospitality, first off, after a journey, you need to invite the guests to the table and only then talk business. The general meeting will allow everybody getting acquainted and drawing up the action plan. Grigory Mazmanyans, director of the Central Asian program of WWF Russia, is a little concerned. Based on the old Soviet standards, during the resettlement of hoofed animals, it is allowed to lose not more than 15% of animals. Since the mission is about the Bukhara deer, an extremely rare fauna representative, Grigory doesn't want to lose a single animal. Although an experienced zoologist and having taken part in multiple similar operations, Rizpek Baydavletov cannot hide his agitation either. It was under his scientific management that 17 years ago the first group of the Hunguls was set free on the bank of the Sirdarya River.
За 15 лет сотрудникам центра
In the course of 15 years, thanks to the active support of the Worldwide Fund for Nature and the Zoology Institute, the staff of the Turkestan nursery succeeded in creating a reproductive herd of the Bukhara deer. During this time, the Bukhara deer population in the Sirdarya floodplain has grown up to 160 animals. The deer got perfectly accustomed to the Sirdarya Tugay woods, which is no surprise as a long time ago this was their homeland. The rangers saw the Hunguls already 150 kilometers from the release point. In 2009, we released several animals that had grown up in the open-air cage. In addition to the animals brought here from the Turkestan nursery, we managed to get 10 more Bukhara deer from Karachingil Hunting Reserve. Under the Preservation of Rare and Disappearing Animals in Kazakhstan program. We also released them into the wild nature. Today we are glad and proud to say that the number of animals in the nursery has increased up to 86 individuals. Over 70 more deer live in the floodplain of the Sirdarya River. Conservationists are working not only to protect the rare animals from poachers, but also to restore their habitats. Last century, the area of Tugay jungle along the Sirdarya reduced significantly due to the changes in the hydrological regime, excessive economic use, and fires. The Bukhara deer were not the only ones to suffer. The populations of wild boars and roes also grew considerably smaller. After the establishment of the national park, the ecosystems started restoring gradually. New trees are rising. The number of peasants and boars is growing every year. We turned out to have a couple of leisure hours and decided to go on an excursion in the Sirdarya riparian jungle. Dense fog covered all the floodplain. Such weather is good for creeping up to wild animals unnoticed and making a couple of nice shots. The river is ice-locked, but you can still see the black spots of ice holes in the chutes and narrow channels. Asiatic poplar, silvery sucker or jida, and purple willow form a solid wall. The Tugai woods are densely bound by bushes like salttree, tamarix, and caligonum. The thick skin probably makes it a convenient place for wild boars making their way through the thickets. Our down jackets are nothing like that, but it's all trifles. It's so nice to walk in the snow-covered woods in the fog, but it's already time for us to return to the cordon and get on with our business here.
Михаил, я хотел у тебя спросить.
Mikhail, I have a question for you as a world-famous animal immobilization expert. In your opinion, what are the safest methods of animal immobilization which we could use taking account of the specifics of our mission? Earlier in the Soviet Union and in Europe, we used curare-type drugs. Just imagine the situation. An animal lies there paralyzed but fully conscious, and then comes a human. The source of extraordinary stress for it. But the animal cannot do anything. From the ethical point of view, it became unacceptable. While working with animals, we use a combination of drugs, like medetomidine, xylotamine and zolazepam. Sometimes it's 1% medetin dilution or Zolotil. Medetomidine has a sedative effect, that is, it puts the animal into the state of deep sleep. Zolotil has an anesthetic effect and causes dissociative anesthesia, which basically means immersion into anesthesia with preserving the vital functions. The Orchods are prompt public enterprise operating under the Forestry and Fauna Committee possesses an extensive experience of animal resettlement. The designated Animal Resettlement Center was established just recently. The zoologists and veterinarians working in the center study the most successful corresponding international techniques and interact with their colleagues from around the globe.
Поскольку Kazakhstan планирует при активной поддержке.
As Kazakhstan, with the active support of the Worldwide Fund for Nature, started restoring its tiger population in the Balkhash area, I mean the restoration of the Turan tiger by means of delivery of the Amur tiger. Your experience with this animal is very interesting for us. How dangerous can tigers be? How do you handle them? Our audience would be excited to hear about it.
В целом, тигр не является опасным животным, если он
In general, in the wild, they are not dangerous at all. Tiger, by all means, avoids humans. In the course of my professional career, I have met tiger on multiple occasions. And every time I faced it, say walking along a wild path, it always ran away. However, if you interfere in its life, and it becomes the subject of your close attention, as for example during catching, it indeed becomes dangerous at once. Sometimes we work with deserted tiger cubs or aggressive tigers. Although Okhotnadzor is the authorized agency to deal with such issues, we're always helping them with catching such animals. Every once in a while, dangerous situations take place, and it is necessary to work with great care, jointly, and observing all safety measures. In the nursery, they feed the deer twice a day. At first, it's necessary to attract them into this small section of the open-air cage. When they come, the door will close. The deer must be immobilized as soon as possible. The whole operation should not exceed 30 minutes. Grigory Masmanians and Respect Baitavletov have developed a minute-by-minute action plan. The distances are verified, the roles are set, and the equipment is ready. The tractor with the transportation boxes, booted and spurred, is waiting for the radio signal. The main group is hiding in the shelter. Mikhail and his assistant carefully creep to the feeding trough. They need to climb the observation tower noticed for the animals and wait when they enter this small section of the open-air cage. Everything is ready. Now we need to be patient and wait. The shooters are sitting in silence, almost not breathing. An hour passes, but the feeding platform is empty except for crested larks, which taking the opportunity through a noisy party. In the north of their habitat, they are migratory, but in the south, they are resident birds. At last, the first female deer appears, cautiously sniffing around. After her, a whole group of deer enter the cage. The entrance door slams, the animals are trapped. Now we need to act quickly. Every minute counts. For animals, catching is rather stressful, so they need to be mobilized and given the sedative drug as soon as possible. Unfortunately, the bushes and several trees limit the firing zone. Here comes the first shot. The injector produces a quiet clap, but deer have an excellent hearing and start worrying. After the injection, an animal falls asleep in around 10 minutes, but can remain under anesthesia no more than an hour. This is how much time we have for moving the animals into transportation boxes. To prevent the males hurting themselves during the journey, they cut off their antlers. It's okay, since in normal conditions they would moo in a month's time and grow new ones in May. Why male deer have antlers and females don't? The answer to this question allowed Darwin formulating the theory of sexual selection. The deer use their antlers not so much for protection against predators, but to fight each other during mating duels. The larger the antlers, the higher the social status. A Bukhara deer may weigh up to 200 kilograms. The females weigh twice as less. It's still quite heavy. While the inspectors are carrying the deer, Mikhail is administering the drugs and carefully putting them in transportation boxes. They need to lie flat to prevent them from twisting their ankles or necks. The animals are in the boxes, and now we need to take them to the road and reload onto the KAMAZ truck for further transportation. We need to work quickly. Every minute of delay increases the risk of accidental death of an animal. An animal can do without food several days, but it's necessary to give them water every day. Under stress, some animals may even refuse to drink and can die from dehydration. The group covers 1,400 kilometers with virtually no stops. The fog and ice make it harder to move. The village of Karaoy, where the head office of Ilie Balkash Reserve is located, is our next destination. The Wildlife Reserve has been operating under the Forestry and Fauna Committee for only half a year, but so much has been done already. In Karaoy, the animals will undergo another reload, as we still need to cover another 70 more kilometers to the open-air cage through the steppe. Zhanibek Jubaniyazov, director of the reserve, supervises the operation. Zhanibek Bisangalevich is an expert, but he looks concerned anyway. It's a historical event. The Hunguls are returning to southern Balkash after 115 years. The Forestry and Fauna Committee has set a number of very important biodiversity conservation tasks for the staff of Ilie Balkash State Nature Reserve. Earlier, Karaoy and Balkash State Wildlife Reserves operated in this area. They were not registered as legal entities and thus had neither the official personnel nor the equipment for their nature protection efforts. At present, the committee gave us 6 UAZ patrol vehicles, 2 tractors and 2 fire trucks, which will be very useful during the fire season. Our team is still not so big. We have 64 people, including 31 inspectors in the protection department and 6 people in our science department. In addition, we receive assistance from several public and international organizations. For example, the United Nations Development Programme gave us 3 NIBA SUVs. The Worldwide Fund for Nature, or WWF, presented us with 2 snowmobiles and built the Ranger Center and the temporary open-air cages for the Bukhara deer. I think we will succeed in fulfilling the tasks set by the government. I mean preserving and restoring the biodiversity of the southern Balkash area. The open-air cage on the coast of Lake Balkash was specifically built for the newly arriving Bukhara deer. Before going into the wild, the deer need to spend several months under quarantine. After quarantine, the first experimental group of deer, only 5 animals, will be released into their natural habitats mainly for scientific purposes. The animals will be given radio-transmitting collars, which will allow collecting data on their movements and adaptation to the new environment. The village residents are observing the loading operation with great interest. They have heard the legends about a beautiful deer referred in the vernacular as the Khan's flower from their grandmothers and grandfathers, but have never seen it with their own eyes. It's great that the deer are coming back. Many Karaoy inhabitants have read in the newspapers about the program to revive the Turan tiger population adopted by the government of Kazakhstan jointly with the WWF. They often ask Grigory Mazmanyans about the potential threats that the tiger might pose to them and their livestock if it comes back after 70 years. As the experience in the far east of Russia shows, tigers are afraid of people if they don't offend them. They never attack people and do everything to avoid humans. However, if you try shooting it or scare it somehow, its behavior will change and it may become extremely dangerous. If a hunter, for example, doesn't manage killing a moving tiger with the first shot in its forehead, the size of a $50 coin, mind you, only 1 in 1,000 hunters are so good, then most likely the tiger will kill the hunter. There was a case when the tiger wounded in its heart made a 17-meter long leap towards the hunter. So it's possible to coexist with tigers. The main thing is not to offend them. All the arriving tigers will have satellite collars and a special group will monitor their movements to prevent their entering the villages. What if the tigers attack our livestock? Regarding livestock, the situation is rather simple. A tiger, of course, can eat a cow it encounters, under the condition it's hungry. However, in this case, after the game managers of our reserve verify the situation, the Worldwide Fund for Nature will compensate the owner with another cow. So if the tigers come, it will be even better for the locals, as they will drive away the wolves. And today, nobody compensates the locals for losing cattle due to wolf attacks. From Karaoy, the country road goes through the Saxawool-covered desert to Lake Balkhash. It's the last segment of the journey. Moving closer to the lake, the landscape gradually changes with reed thickets. The new ranger center was built on the bank of the dry creek known as Kors. This is where the patrol inspection groups start their daily raids along the coast of Balkhash and the adjacent part of the Sarı-Yüksek Otrao Desert. The center also has a warehouse for fuel and lubricant materials and a stock of food for the Bukhara deer. Sharip Yesayev, head of the Reserve's Protection Department, stays here almost all the time. In the beginning, until all the procedures become routine, the center requires special attention. There is still so much to do. Here's our 220-volt solar battery. Let me show you the inside. This is our tower, which we use for radio communications. 20 more kilometers left from the range center to the open-air cage. The unloading of the deer takes place in complete darkness. Thanks to the team's professionalism, all animals made it to their final destination, although it was a difficult trip for them. Yet the organizers are still concerned with the psychological condition of the animals. Was their nervous system able to cope with such an outburst of adrenaline? The solemn moment. The cages are open and the Hungals once again set their hoofs on the Balkhash land after 115 years. All the participants of the experiment are overwhelmed with joy. In the course of the mission, our film crew got inspired with enthusiasm too. We kept on calling the reserve every day, asking how the Hungals were doing, whether they were able to recover from the stress, whether they started eating normally, and whether they were able to adapt to the new place. Every time Janibek Bisengalevich calmed us down and assured that the experiment was developing successfully. He also promised our film crew to allow to come to the reserve once again to film the final stage of the operation, the return of the Hungal, the release of the animals into the wild. It will occur approximately half a year later. Let's watch the fate of the beautiful animals together.